What you're about to hear is not a routine update from the front lines. This is a strategic failure so profound it has shifted the momentum of a war that has gripped the world for years. Today, we expose Russia's biggest military blunder in Ukraine, a mistake so significant that Moscow never saw it coming, and the consequences are devastating for the Kremlin's ambitions. In this video, we will break down the battlefield events, the intelligence failures, the drone warfare revolution, and what this means for the future of global security. Let's begin. By late December 2024, Russian military leadership believed they were watching a familiar pattern unfold. In the Kursk region, a strategically sensitive border area, Ukrainian forces appeared to be pulling back. Positions were abandoned, movements slowed, and frontline pressure seemed to ease. To Russian commanders, this looked like exhaustion. After months of intense fighting, they assumed Ukraine was finally running out of manpower, ammunition, and momentum. Intelligence briefings reinforced that belief, painting a picture of a weakened opponent struggling to hold ground. Moscow interpreted these signs as an opportunity. The Kremlin believed the initiative was slipping back into its hands, that a decisive push could finally tilt the battlefield in Russia's favor. Plans were drawn up quickly, and forward units were encouraged to press deeper, confident that resistance would be minimal. But this confidence was built on a dangerous assumption. What Russia believed was retreat was, in reality, preparation. Ukrainian commanders had anticipated exactly how Moscow would read the situation. Every apparent weakness, every abandoned position was calculated. Ukraine wasn't falling back, it was inviting Russia forward. And as Russian forces moved in, convinced they were gaining the upper hand, they were unknowingly stepping into a trap that would soon expose one of the most serious strategic misjudgments of the war. What unfolded next was not a conventional counterattack, but a carefully engineered deception operation. Ukrainian forces executed a textbook feigned retreat, a tactic as old as warfare itself, but devastating when done correctly. Positions were vacated just enough to appear vulnerable, while key units quietly repositioned out of sight. Russian troops advanced quickly, encouraged by minimal resistance and the belief that Ukrainian lines were collapsing, but with every kilometer gained, their situation worsened. Supply routes grew longer and more exposed, communication between units became fragmented, air and artillery support struggled to keep pace with the rapidly moving front line. The deeper Russian forces pushed, the more isolated they became. Defensive formations thinned, coordination weakened, and command control deteriorated. Ukrainian intelligence tracked these movements in real time, waiting for the precise moment when Russian units were fully committed and unable to withdraw safely. Then the counterstrike came. Ukrainian forces struck simultaneously from multiple directions, targeting logistics, command posts, and flanks. Precision attacks exploited gaps that Russia could no longer close. What had looked like a successful advance instantly turned into chaos. Retreat routes were cut off, units were encircled, and losses mounted rapidly. The Kursk operation transformed from a perceived Russian opportunity into a battlefield disaster, one with consequences Moscow had not prepared for. While most global attention remained fixed on the land battles in eastern Ukraine, a quieter but equally transformative campaign was unfolding at sea. Far from the trenches and artillery duels, Ukraine was rewriting the rules of naval warfare using technology that few had fully anticipated. Ukraine deployed a new generation of naval drones, small, unmanned surface vessels designed to move fast, stay low, and strike with precision. These machines functioned like floating guided missiles, carrying explosive payloads directly toward high-value targets. Their low radar signature made them extremely difficult to detect, especially for a navy built around large, traditional warships. In the Black Sea, these drones overwhelmed Russian defenses. Even heavily armed vessels struggled to respond in time. Several ships were damaged, disabled, or sunk outright, forcing the Russian Navy to pull back from areas it once dominated. Critical shipping routes were disrupted, ports became vulnerable, and Russia's sense of control over the maritime domain eroded rapidly. This was not conventional naval combat. There were no fleet engagements or broadside exchanges. Instead, Ukraine leveraged speed, surprise, and affordability to neutralize superior firepower. The result was a strategic shock. Russia's traditional naval doctrine built on size and firepower proved poorly suited against agile, unmanned threats. In a matter of months, the balance of power in the Black Sea shifted, marking a turning point in modern maritime warfare. Then came an operation that stunned military analysts and rattled the Russian public. In a single night, Ukraine launched one of the most ambitious drone attacks ever recorded. A coordinated swarm of 130 unmanned aerial vehicles crossed deep into Russian airspace, reaching the skies above Moscow. These drones did not rely on brute force alone. They exploited gaps in radar coverage, overwhelmed air defense systems through sheer numbers, and approached from multiple directions simultaneously. Some were intercepted, but many reached their targets. Infrastructure sites, military facilities, and communications nodes were struck, forcing emergency responses across the capital. For Russian air defenses, the attack exposed uncomfortable truths. Systems designed to counter aircraft and missiles struggled against low-cost, low-altitude drones launched in massive numbers. The cost imbalance was stark, expensive interceptor missiles fired at relatively cheap unmanned aircraft. But beyond the physical damage, the psychological impact was profound. Moscow, long insulated from the realities of the battlefield, suddenly felt the war at home. Air raid sirens, explosions, and disrupted services shattered the sense of distance from the conflict. This attack delivered a clear message. Ukraine's operational reach had expanded dramatically. The war was no longer confined to the front lines. For the first time, Russia's heartland was firmly within range, and the strategic implications were impossible to ignore. At the same time these battlefield operations were unfolding, Ukraine opened another front one, aimed not at soldiers, but at the economic foundation of Russia's war effort. Through a series of carefully planned precision strikes, Ukrainian forces targeted key elements of Russia's energy infrastructure. Using a combination of long-range drones and aerial attacks, Ukraine struck oil refineries, fuel depots, pumping stations, and distribution hubs. In just 5 days, the damage exceeded an estimated $1.3 billion. These were not symbolic attacks. Each target was selected for its role in sustaining military operations, industrial output, and transport logistics. Fuel shortages began to ripple outward, transportation slowed, supply chains tightened, and the cost of sustaining frontline operations increased sharply. Troops that relied on steady fuel deliveries faced delays, while repair and resupply efforts grew more complicated by disrupted energy flows. This was not random sabotage or opportunistic destruction. It was a calculated economic campaign designed to weaken Russia's ability to fight over time. By attacking the systems that power vehicles, factories, and supply lines, Ukraine applied pressure far beyond the battlefield. Putin's strategic planning had assumed the war would remain primarily a military contest. What it failed to anticipate was this sustained, multi-vector pressure, one that struck simultaneously at Russia's economy, logistics, and long-term endurance. Another critical factor behind Russia's mounting difficulties was the steady flow of Western military support to Ukraine. Over time, Kyiv gained access to high-precision artillery, advanced armored vehicles, integrated air defense systems, and near-real-time intelligence sharing. Together, these capabilities fundamentally altered how Ukraine fought the war. Precision-guided munitions allowed Ukrainian forces to strike command centers, ammunition depots, and logistics hubs with far greater accuracy than before. Advanced surveillance and intelligence improved situational awareness, giving commanders a clearer picture of enemy movements and vulnerabilities. Russian forces, meanwhile, often found themselves exposed, predictable, and slow to adapt. These systems did more than increase firepower. They reshaped decision-making on the battlefield. Engagements that once would have been evenly matched became one-sided, as Ukrainian units identified threats earlier and responded faster. Russian offensives were blunted before they could fully develop, while defensive positions were systematically dismantled. Crucially, Russia struggled to counter this technological shift. Training gaps, rigid command structures, and limited battlefield flexibility prevented rapid adaptation. What Moscow expected to be conventional engagements turned into complex, fast-moving operations it could not control. In short, Western-enabled technology widened the battlefield gap. It transformed Ukraine's defensive posture into a proactive advantage and exposed how unprepared Russia was for a modern, networked war. As these pressures mounted, the human cost for Russia escalated dramatically. Official reports, leaked assessments, and independent analysts estimate that hundreds of thousands of Russian soldiers were killed or wounded in 2024 alone. These staggering losses tell a deeper story than battlefield intensity. They reveal systemic failures within Russia's military structure. Units were often sent forward with inadequate support, limited intelligence, and unclear objectives. Logistics struggled to keep pace with advancing forces, leaving soldiers undersupplied and exposed. Reinforcements arrived late or not at all, while medical evacuation and recovery systems became overwhelmed. At the command level, rigid hierarchy proved costly. Decisions were centralized, slow, and often disconnected from conditions on the ground. Junior officers lacked the authority to adapt quickly, even when situations deteriorated rapidly. Meanwhile, Ukrainian forces exploited this rigidity, maneuvering faster and striking where response times lagged. The result was widespread confusion. Orders conflicted, coordination between units broke down, and morale declined sharply. Soldiers found themselves fighting without clear purpose or confidence in leadership. This breakdown in command, combined with mounting casualties, turned what might have been manageable tactical setbacks into a cascading strategic failure. It was not a single defeat, but an accumulation of misjudgments, one that ultimately transformed Russia's campaign into a prolonged and costly catastrophe. As the battlefield balance shifted, diplomacy was forced back onto the agenda. Talks that had once stalled or collapsed under mutual distrust began resurfacing, not because positions softened, but because realities on the ground demanded reassessment. Military outcomes were now reshaping political calculations. World powers watching the conflict closely started reconsidering negotiation frameworks that once seemed fixed. Proposals previously dismissed as unrealistic were revisited, while red lines quietly moved. The reason was simple. The balance of military strength had changed, and with it, the leverage each side brought to the table. For Russia, the situation became increasingly difficult. Setbacks on land, at sea, and in the air weakened Moscow's bargaining position. Diplomatic threats carried less weight when military momentum faltered. The promise of decisive victory, once a central negotiating tool, no longer held credibility. For Ukraine and its supporters, the conversation evolved. It was no longer focused solely on preventing collapse or securing short-term ceasefires. Instead, discussion shifted toward long-term security guarantees, deterrence mechanisms, and international commitments designed to prevent future aggression. What emerges from these negotiations will not only determine the trajectory of the war, but could redefine the security architecture of Europe for decades. The decisions made at the negotiating table now carry consequences far beyond the battlefield. From the beginning of the conflict, Moscow worked aggressively to control the narrative at home. State media projected confidence, inevitability, and strength. The message was clear. Victory was only a matter of time. But over months of repeated setbacks, that narrative began to fracture. Battlefield failures could not be fully concealed. Casualty numbers climbed, equipment losses mounted, and previously announced successes quietly disappeared from official reporting. Gradually, the tone of state media shifted. Confident predictions gave way to defensive explanations and vague justifications. The myth of a swift and decisive victory unraveled in real time. Broad claims were replaced with carefully worded statements emphasizing resilience, sacrifice, and long-term struggle. These rhetorical changes signaled more than simple messaging adjustments. They revealed growing anxiety within the system itself. Controlling public perception became increasingly difficult as the gap between official statements and observable realities widened. Families felt the impact of losses, communities faced economic strain, and unanswered questions multiplied. This erosion of narrative confidence represents more than a propaganda failure. It reflects a leadership struggling to maintain authority over a story it once dominated. When messaging loses coherence, it exposes deeper uncertainty and undermines the legitimacy leaders rely on to sustain prolonged conflict. Taken together, these developments point to a profound shift in how modern conflict is understood. First, Russia's military is no longer viewed as an unstoppable force. The aura of inevitability that once surrounded it has been significantly diminished, not just by losses, but by exposed vulnerabilities. Second, the war has accelerated the rise of asymmetric warfare. Drones, precision strikes, intelligence integration, and cost-effective technology have reshaped the battlefield. Smaller forces, when properly equipped and coordinated, can now challenge much larger militaries in ways that were unthinkable just a decade ago. Third, the long-term cost of aggression is becoming clearer. Economic damage, political isolation, and sustained military losses are influencing how nations assess risk and power projection. Future leaders may think twice before assuming military superiority guarantees success. In practical terms, these lessons are already being absorbed. Weapons development programs are accelerating. Alliance commitments are being re-examined. Defense budgets across NATO and allied nations are shifting to prioritize flexibility, resilience, and technological integration. What began as a regional conflict has evolved into a global case study. The outcomes of this war will shape military planning, diplomacy, and deterrence strategies worldwide long after the fighting itself ends. The consequences of this blunder extend far beyond Ukraine and Russia. Militaries, policymakers, and intelligence agencies around the world are now reassessing fundamental assumptions about modern warfare. Strategies that once prioritized size, firepower, and conventional dominance are being re-examined in light of what this conflict has revealed. Entire regions are reviewing their approaches to military readiness, cyber defense, and the integration of artificial intelligence on the battlefield. Drone warfare, electronic disruption, and real-time intelligence coordination are no longer considered experimental. They are now central to national defense planning. Nations that were previously hesitant to invest heavily in next-generation systems are accelerating development programs. Defense budgets are shifting toward unmanned platforms, networked command systems, and rapid response capabilities designed to counter asymmetric threats. At the same time, concerns about escalation, miscalculation, and unintended conflict are growing. The lessons emerging from this war will shape the next era of deterrence. Leaders must now consider not only military strength, but adaptability, innovation, and resilience. Russia's miscalculation is becoming a case study taught far beyond military academies. It serves as a warning to governments everywhere. Misreading an opponent and underestimating technology carries a cost measured not only in battlefield losses, but in regional stability and global security. When viewed in full, the sequence of events tells a clear story. Russia advanced under false assumptions. Ukraine transformed a controlled retreat into a devastating tactical trap. Through innovation, intelligence, and strategic timing, the battlefield was reshaped in ways Moscow did not anticipate. Unmanned drones on land, sea, and in the air disrupted traditional defenses. Western support enhanced Ukraine's precision and awareness. Economic pressure, psychological impact, and battlefield deception combined to undermine Russia's operational posture. What appeared to be strength exposed deep structural weaknesses. The result was a dramatic shift in momentum. Russian forces were forced into reactive positions, while Ukrainian units gained confidence, initiative, and strategic depth. More importantly, the global perception of military power changed. Assumptions about inevitability and dominance no longer held. This moment represents more than a single failure or lost engagement. It marks a turning point in how wars are planned, fought, and understood. This was not just a blunder, it was a lesson in adaptability, in technological transformation, and in the dangers of underestimating an opponent. One that will influence military thinking long after the fighting ends. If you found this analysis insightful, please like, share, and subscribe for more deep breakdowns of world affairs. Comment below, what do you think is next in the Russia-Ukraine conflict? Thanks for watching.